Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Aquarium lecture series, and this is the last lecture of our fall 2017 season. Generous support from the Lowell Institute allows the Aquarium to offer these programs free of charge, and we're grateful to have their support. Please silence your cell phones. I'm actually lecturing to myself at the moment. Tonight our lecture will be filmed, and this lecture and many others are available on the New England Aquarium YouTube channel and the WGBH Forum Network to share with your friends and family. I'm Scott Krause. I'm a Vice President at the New England Aquarium and a Senior Science Advisor. And tonight we're really excited to celebrate the STELLWAGEN Bank National Marine Sanctuary's 25th anniversary. Many years ago, the threats to the underwater bank east of Boston here began with things like construction teams that considered sand and gravel mining for the big dig. There was a developer who wanted to put a casino out there. Some of you may remember this. It was the size of about 40 cruise ships, and it was outside the 3-mile limit, so we could gamble to our heart's content. And luckily, with the backing of thousands of whale watchers, students, fishermen, and environmentalists, the productive region around STELLWAGEN Bank was designated as a National Marine Sanctuary in 1992. So tonight, we're lucky to have Rich Delaney, who during the process to create this sanctuary served as a director of the Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management Office, and Ben Haskell, who is currently leading a team of researchers and educators who work to understand this and protect this special place. And they're going to talk about the first 25 years of New England's only national marine sanctuary and a vision for the next 25 years. Now, Rich Delaney is currently the president and CEO of the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown, Massachusetts. He's provided consultations to governments in over 20 countries regarding coastal and ocean management, capacity building, institutional strengthening, and public outreach. Previously, he was the founding director of the Urban Harbors Institute at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. He served as Assistant Secretary of Environmental Affairs in Massachusetts and was the national chair of the Coastal States Organization in Washington, D.C. As a member of the International Board of Directors of the Global Ocean Forum, he participated in the Rio Plus 20 events in Rio de Janeiro, focusing on sustainable development and conservation of oceans and coasts, as well as Oceans Day at the Paris Climate Conference. He serves as the vice chair of the STELLWAGEN Bank National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council, chair of the Cape Cod National Seashores Advisory Commission, and chair of the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce's Wastewater Task Force. So it's amazing we actually got an evening out of him. And Ben Haskell is currently serving as the acting superintendent for the STELLWAGEN Bank National Marine Sanctuary. He oversees sanctuary policies and planning, facilities management, and diverse projects including biodiversity conservation, marine mammal research, seafloor habitat studies, use assessments, and maritime archaeology. He's been with NOAA for 24 years, working to protect special ocean places, including STELLWAGEN Bank and the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuaries. Prior to coming to the STELLWAGEN Sanctuary, he served as the science coordinator for the Florida Keys Sanctuary from 1995 to 2000, where he played a pivotal role in the establishment of the Tortugas Ecological Reserve, which is a really cool place if you're down there. Prior to coming to NOAA, he worked at a variety of marine labs on the East Coast and co-authored a book on ecosystem health. And we're going to start with Richard and move on to Ben. Please welcome them both.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott, and good evening, everyone. Glad you're all here. Thanks for your interest in marine sanctuaries. I'm just going to do a little bit of the background and a little bit of retrospective and history as to how we got to have a sanctuary off our coast. And then really Ben's going to talk a lot about what we're doing now and where we hope to go in the future with, of course, your interest and support. But the first questions that I want to help people understand is basically what is a marine sanctuary? Because it's sometimes confusing to folks. Where do they occur? Hopefully that answer is pretty easy. In the ocean. And why do they matter? But my first question to you is, how many people have visited in person, physically, STELLWAGEN Bank National Marine Sanctuary. That is wonderful, Ben. Most of the crowds we talk to, nobody raises their hand because it's way offshore. It's not easy to get to, but this is terrific. Well, then I don't need to say much more. You guys understand. But they are really an ocean version of our network of national parks. Sanctuary is sometimes a confusing part of the nomenclature because there are internationally reserves and preserves and no-take zones and lots of other names. But basically, this is a protected area, a special area that has good, important resources that needs good management. And I'm going to back up a little bit and go up to 30,000 feet and talk about sanctuaries in an international setting and then start to zero back down. Because outside of the United States, marine protected areas or sanctuary designations really are in vogue, and a lot of countries around the world are using this particular management technique to manage their oceans in a more comprehensive, science-based ways. So much so that the United Nations has adopted, as part of its Sustainable Development Goal number 14, which addresses oceans, the target for increasing the amount of total acreage of ocean, global ocean, that's under some kind of sanctuary or marine protected management scheme. I don't know if you're familiar with Sustainable Development Goals, but they really are the driving framework for the United Nations, and there are 17. They relate to producing enough food to eradicate poverty, health, education, all of the good things the United Nations does. They'd never had a Sustainable Development Goal for oceans until very recently. And so that's why we're thrilled that they've set this up. And as I said, one of the targets, there are many targets in number 14, but the one target is to actually have 10% of the world's oceans under some sort of sanctuary, reserve, comprehensive, science-based management scheme by the year 2030. And the numbers right now we're at about 4%. So we have a way to go. That's about 9,000. There are 9,600. What the umbrella term for this is a marine protected area. You know, then underneath it are lots of other terms. So basically, here's what it is. In all those areas, everything ranging from large-scale shipping to small-scale fishing are regulated to one degree or another. There are a few areas that are actually what you might think of when you say the word sanctuary: pristine, preserved, like areas that are no-take zones, no fishing, no commercial activity can happen. There aren't enough of those, unfortunately, but there are some. And just on the bottom, there's a little quick example. Other parts of the world have used these things very successfully. In Indonesia, they saw a 90% drop in illegal fishing in the area that they described as a bird's head skiscape sanctuary. And so that's really a going concern internationally, and I'm happy to report that seems to be growing in support. Back in the United States, the driving mechanism was and still is, the National Marine Sanctuaries Act. And here's the basic congressional mandate from that act. Basically, it says that the Congress authorizes the Secretary of the Department of Commerce to designate and protect areas of the marine environment with special national significance due to their conservation, recreation, ecological, historical, scientific, cultural, and archaeological, and education, and aesthetic qualities. So it's a wide range. Some of our U.S. sanctuaries are really historic sites. Many are very important ecologically, most of them are, but it's a range of important things. They're special, and they deserve, consequently, some special activity, management. This is a little wordy, but basically the agency that was charged with overseeing the implementation of the National Marine Sanctuaries Act is NOAA, and that's the group we work with and Ben works for. We have about 600,000 square miles of U.S. territory and Great Lakes territory under this management right now. They range across the continental U.S. and now out into a very large one, which is called a marine monument. not a sanctuary monument, but again, both together are under the umbrella of marine protected areas out in the middle of the Pacific. So the United States has actually, in a way, been working toward marine protection through a sanctuaries concept longer than most countries, and we're happy to see other countries now really getting involved. Now zeroing in closer right here to home, as Scott said, just off our coast, there is this thing called a bank, basically an underwater plateau, shallow area. You can see that in the yellow inside the box, which is the boundary of the STELLWAGEN Bank Sanctuary. Just about 6 or 7 miles from Provincetown, where my office is located, down there in the south and to the west. I guess that's about 15 miles off the coast of Boston, roughly. So there it is. Very special bathymetry because it's shallow and because of the ocean currents there. It's a very rich, biologically rich and diverse area. Everything from small phyto and zooplankton up to our large marine mammals. But it is the ecosystem that is producing tremendous value and that is special and that warranted a designation by the Congress, by the way. These designations are made by Congress. I mentioned not only are ecological features important, but our historical, and Stellwagen has some of that too, some amazing shipwrecks that are worthy of special attention and management. And it's not that we just discovered Stellwagen. Back in 1734, fishermen and others knew of this area. It was called Middle Bank at that point, but they knew there was something special about it. The fishing stocks were productive, not only for our country, but European fishing fleets would come across the ocean to take advantage of that. And then as we got jumped up to our point in time, or back to basically 25 years ago, 1972, we here in New England and Boston wanted to take advantage of the Marine Sanctuaries Act and get this designated as a special place. Congressman Gary Studs was our congressman at that time. Fortunately, he was the chairman of the House Merchant Marine and Fisheries Subcommittee in the House. It no longer exists, but his committee, with Studs' leadership, really passed almost all of the marine and ocean legislation that we even have today. He was a real hero of the ocean, and consequently, later after his death, or not after his death, but before he died, it was renamed Gary E. Studs Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. But the actual work or act in Congress was called the Ocean Act of 1992, and in that act, there was language that made Stellwagen a National Marine Sanctuary. So the sanctuary produced a management plan, a rather hefty document. It's online. You should take a look at it. It has some specific actions that the sanctuary thinks are necessary in order to preserve that great biological diversity and the historical shipwrecks. And that's what Ben's job is all about now, is making sure that gets implemented. But back at that time, prior to the designation, pre-1972, there were a number of threats that were of concern to all of us. Scott mentioned a few, but there was some talk about actually exploring for oil and gas on top of this bank. There were, and Scott mentioned this too, we had the big dig going on, we had a building and construction boom going on. Sand was needed to produce concrete to build all the skyscrapers, so there was some interest in dredging sand and gravel off the bank. We also have the Boston Shipping Channel going right through the middle of this area with thousands of ships, tens of thousands of ships every year. Turns out this is also a critical whale habitat, so the conflict between whale habitat feeding and shipping, very important issue that needed management. There was even some discussion of offshore wind. But the thing that really tipped the balance was when a fellow named Richard Google, spelled G-U-G-L-E, not like our Google websites, decided that he wanted to have a casino. And the design, if I go back just a little bit, he actually wanted to take something like this platform, this drilling platform, take all the drilling equipment off the top and replace it with basically a hotel casino with little minarets and fancy design. It was something, he was serious enough, but the point was, this fellow realized when he looked at all the laws that there was no real federal or state jurisdiction that would immediately be able to manage his project. He was outside of the state boundary, so state laws weren't applying. He was able to probably deal with most of the federal regulations. He was going to take all his trash and not dump in the ocean, take it back off the platform. He was going to recycle his wastewater, so he wasn't going to be requiring a discharge permit. He almost had it solved. And when we realized that, we said we better find a way to manage this kind of activity and everything else on the bank. And that's what had happened. And a particular concern was if any or all of those activities were to happen, the cumulative impact of that is what really makes the difference. So we, all of this finally almost carried the day to success. We did eventually get back the Congress through the Ocean Act to designate it as a sanctuary, but there was a lot of process, and I'm not going to go through how a sanctuary actually gets designated, but by law, it really is a true, transparent public process. We had lots of public hearings. We had testimony on all the different options, where the boundary should be, how big the boundary should be, what the management regulations, what should be prohibited, what should be allowed under management schemes. So it really was an involvement with people like yourselves who are interested, got involved. And it still carries on today because there is a STELLWAGEN Bank Advisory Council. I'm the vice chair of that. You can see the different sectors or stakeholder groups that are represented. And by the way, every few months or a couple times a year, the sanctuary advertises publicly for people who are interested in serving in some of these positions. So if any of you want to get a little bit further involved and you keep an eye out for an opening to represent a group that you may have some interest in, we'd be happy to have your interest. But we meet regularly. We advise the superintendent, Ben Haskell, on some of these issues. So what's still, even today, it's a very much your sanctuary, a public sanctuary that needs your help. One of the issues that I want to mention is, and it's the naughtiest one in a way, the thorniest one, was how would this sanctuary and its management plan deal with fisheries? I mentioned earlier it's a very biologically productive area, which means lots of organisms, which means lots of fish, which means lots of fishermen, dragging fishing nets back and forth across the Stellwagen Bank bottom, and basically coming in conflict with whales and other animals. So there was a real sticking point at one time as the public discussions were going on leading up to this. And the argument from the fishing industry side was, look, we already have a management system set up called the New England Fisheries Management Council. That will manage our activity, whether it's inside a sanctuary boundary or outside. Excuse me. The other argument was, well, this is a particularly special area. It shouldn't be treated just like every other fishing stock. This is where certain extra management activities should happen to protect the ecosystem from side effects of fishing and dragging. So that delayed the designation for some time until finally, as part of the process, several groups met and agreed we will abide by and utilize the existing National New England Fisheries Management Council process, and the sanctuary would not introduce new fishing regulations. That kind of broke the logjam, put us where we are, but it still is an issue that we in the sanctuary still wrestle with every day, because it's still an activity that happens on the bank, and we need to have it happen, if it does at all, sustainably. And there's Congressman Studs and his successor, Congressman Bill Delahunt, at the 25 years ago this June, I think, when they actually signed the document. The mission of the sanctuary, and Ben will talk about this more, is to conserve, protect, and enhance the biodiversity, ecological integrity, and cultural legacy of the sanctuary while allowing for compatible use. And that last phrase, that last sentence, is the one that requires very close and sometimes challenging management decisions to be made. Looking ahead, there are even all those threats that I mentioned. Some have materialized, some didn't, but there's an ever-evolving set of activities. Now we have an increasing number of recreational boaters who are able to access that area very easily and in big numbers. It also happens to be a prime humpback whale habitat. You know, if you've been out in the whale watch, that's how probably most of you got out to be in the bank. You've seen the whales, the humpback whales in particular. But now we have people who may be not as educated or aware of the impact they're having on whales by coming up close. We're actually finding that some fishermen, either deliberately or accidentally, cast their lures across the back or where the whales are. So we have increasing numbers of this. Just a little example of how do we handle that? How's the sanctuary get a handle on managing that kind of activity? Also, as we are in the middle of rewriting that management plan, looking ahead, climate change has to be a theme that the sanctuary and all of us deal with. If you've thought about climate change impacts on oceans, they're significant. In fact, they're already happening. And you can see the average temperature of the oceans are projected to increase, but the hot spot of all areas and all oceans in the world is right in the Gulf of Maine, right? We're just from Stellwagen Bank out. That is increasing at a faster rate than perhaps any place else in the world. So we have and Stellwagen has a front row seat for figuring out how climate change is increasing the ocean temperature, along with the increasing amount of carbon dioxide that is being produced by our power plants and precipitating out into the ocean, causing more acidity, which has all kinds of complications. Sea levels are rising. Those animals that I've talked about that we initially looked at and were thought worthy of protecting their habitat 25 years ago, some of that habitat is shifting. Codfish are moving to warmer, colder waters. Lobsters are shifting. There's a lot of habitat shifting going on. That's all part of how we think about the sanctuary. So climate change clearly is going to be an issue, a driver for how Stellwagen implements its management plan in the future. Two other quick points as I wrap up. It's just not Ben and his staff that are responsible. They work in partnership with lots of us. They work with the New England, the fellows here, the scientists here at the New England Aquarium are strong partners with the sanctuary. My group, called the Center for Coastal Studies, does science. We're an applied science group. We like to help managers find science-based solutions to issues. Here are some of the topics that we deal with. Many of those take place right inside the sanctuary. And the sanctuary is not an isolated part of the ocean either. It's connected in many ways, sort of ecological pathways to other areas. One of the most innovative things Stellwagen has done is identify other critical habitats that are along the route of the migratory route of humpback whales. It reached out and helped establish management areas like sanctuaries up and down the East Coast where the whales go. And now we have kind of a network of sanctuaries, international network of sanctuaries that mimic or mirror, not mimic, but mirror the ecological habitat and migratory routes of humpbacks. That's really an innovative way to manage oceans, and obviously there are no political boundaries in the ocean, so you need to have this kind of international cooperation. So my last slide, ending just exactly in 20 minutes, which is my allotted time, is that we are based, the SAC headquarters is in Scituate. Please go to our website, look at all of the documents. There's a wonderful amount of information from our science reports. There are lots of activities that we do all the time that you are invited to. It's really your sanctuary. And if you discover it and learn more about it, engage in it, we'd be happy. I think we'd all have the next 25 years would be even better and more productive than the last 25. So thanks for your attention. I'm going to ask Ben to step up and take it from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich, and good evening, everybody. You're all like evenly spread out across the whole room. That's interesting. Nice job. It's really heartening to see that so many of you have already been out there to the National Marine Sanctuary. I want to thank you all for coming out, but I also want to thank the New England Aquarium for this opportunity. We can't do what we do without strong partnerships, and the Center for Coastal Studies is an amazingly capable and effective organization, so I'm very grateful for their partnership with us. Yeah, I feel a certain kinship with the Center for Coastal Studies. I view both of our organizations sort of like a little engine that could. If you know that children's story. And what I mean by that is that we get a hell of a lot done with very few people and very few resources. I want to pick up on some of the themes that Rich touched on by providing a little more context and explanation. But before I do that, I thought I'd explain to you sort of what motivates me to do what I do and to come into work every day. I love the Gulf of Maine, and I love that my job has me protecting a very small but special part of it. In 1988, when my wife and I loaded up our pickup truck and headed south to Washington, D.C. for her fellowship, I promised myself then that I would return to the Gulf of Maine to help protect it. I'm standing here now before you as the acting superintendent of New England's only national marine sanctuary, doing what I can do to protect this place. And I'm very humbled and honored for doing that. I've been working to protect STELLWAGEN Bank Sanctuary for 17 years, and I can tell you that it's not an easy job when you come to accept that the progress in New England comes in very small steps. But the work is gratifying once you realize that. Marine conservation in general is not easy in New England, as any fisherman, fishery manager, or environmentalist knows all too well. But trying to carve out a role for a marine protected area in a seascape dominated by traditional commercial fishery with a 300-year history has been particularly challenging. Protection to me does not imply keeping people out or making the place in a complete no-take marine reserve. That is not our vision and not our goal. Protection to me is finding a way to make uses, whether it be fishing or whale watching or anything else, compatible with the long-term sustainability of the very things, habitat, fish, whales, what have you, that provide the services that we as humans need. So my vision for this sanctuary in the next 25 years is that it becomes an integral part of the fabric of marine resource management in the Gulf of Maine, and that it serves as a model of sustainable uses, including fishing in the larger region. So there you have it. I guess I'm done. So thank you. Just kidding. As I said, I love the Gulf of Maine, and I've come to appreciate its wildlife through diving, which I've been doing since getting certified in the frigid March waters off of Bar Harbor 35 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long. I lead the small dive team at the sanctuary, and we get out there about 6 times per year, if we're lucky. It's a difficult place to dive. It's a difficult place to get to. The currents are strong. It's deep. It's cold. But I actually prefer diving there than to diving in the tropics. Diving is an amazing experience where you literally leave the life you're comfortable in and breathe effortlessly in and enter an entirely different medium and a mysterious world. In the deep, breathing does not come effortlessly, and you are hyper aware of every breath because of the regulator in your mouth and the bubbles that are streaming by your ears on the way to the surface 100 feet above. It's not a good place to get into trouble. But what outweighs the risk for me is experiencing the wonder and the unexpected. For example, on one particular dive several years ago on a historic shipwreck on the southwest corner of the sanctuary, my partner and I were diving on, were photographing on the wreck. And at one point I looked over my partner's shoulder and there was this big white mouth. And after I got my composure back, this mola mola, or ocean sunfish, comes sauntering by, literally this far away, checking us out, wondering, what are these aliens doing in my world? It's rare to see these fish vertical. I consider these about the weirdest fish in the ocean, personally. And you rarely see them down at depth vertically. Usually they're at the surface, seemingly sunbathing. My appreciation for marine protected areas as a management approach has evolved over my 24 years of working for NOAA's National Marine Sanctuary Program. One of my most formative experiences was when I worked in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. In 1998, I had the rather unique opportunity to play a major role in the creation of the Tortugas Ecological Reserve, which was at the time the nation's largest no-take marine reserve. Helping to create that special protected area in the ocean fills me with a sense of satisfaction and gratitude, not because the area restricts people's activities, but because it enriches our souls and buoys our spirits. Moreover, we learn a lot about how the ecosystem works when we create these protected areas. In fact, we learn things we had no idea we didn't know. My litmus test for a successful marine protected area is that when you visit it, you are overwhelmed with a sense of awe and you feel a tad scared because of the abundance of fish or other vertebrates, kind of like this tiger grouper peering out from under a coral head. So why is this place special? Let me give you a few examples from the long list of accomplishments. But first, it's important to understand that our mission with the sanctuary is twofold: to conserve, protect, and enhance the biodiversity, ecological integrity, and the cultural legacy of the sanctuary while allowing for compatible use. We think of our mission as having three pillars of protection: biodiversity, marine mammals, and historic resources. One of the highlights of the past 25 years is discovering and protecting the many historic shipwrecks that adorn the sanctuary, such as the steamship Portland. We are required to do this because we must comply with the National Historic Preservation Act, one of the several laws that govern our activities. In 2002, I mounted an expedition to confirm the location of the Titanic of New England, as she's called. She was the flagship of coastal steamers, or night boats as they were called in New England, and plied the waters from India Wharf, right over here next door to us, to Portland, Maine. 4 days ago, back in 1898, at 7 o'clock in the evening, the Portland left India Wharf, unknowingly heading into the teeth of a ferocious storm. She foundered off of Gloucester, overcome by 30-foot waves, and sank with all hands lost. Two explorers, John Fish and Arnie Carr, found her in 1989 after years of painstaking research, but they weren't able to definitively identify her as the Portland. Knowing that she was likely in the sanctuary, I asked Arnie Carr if he'd tell me where she was, and he did. She laid right where he said she'd be, so we obtained some side-scan sonar image, such as the image you see here, and deployed the remotely operated vehicle to get some high-definition video and images. These we used to confirm that she was, in fact, the Portland. This became huge international news when we announced it at a press conference here in Boston in August of 2002. This one event put us on the map, so to speak, and launched NOAA's Maritime Heritage Program, which thrives to this day. We experienced firsthand just how powerful shipwrecks can be in terms of connecting people to these places, primarily because of the human interest stories that they embody. Arnie Carr also told us about another nearby wreck, and when we went to side scan this site, this is what appeared on the computer screen. This is the wreck of two coal-carrying schooners, the Frank A. Palmer and Louise B. Crary, that collided bow to bow in 1902 and sank like stones because they were full of coal. This is probably one of the most dramatic side-scan sonar images of a wreck you'll ever see. It's right in our own sanctuary. We were able to get the Portland listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2005, and this site listed in 2007. One of the things our team does really well in collaboration with our partners is to turn challenges into opportunities and come up with practical solutions that are science-based. There is no better example of this than when Dr. Dave Wiley, our research coordinator, and his team convinced the International Maritime Organization, which is the UN body that approves all shipping routes in the world, to move the Boston shipping lane in order to protect endangered right whales and other large baleen whales. Suffice it to say that there's a lot of shipping traffic in the sanctuary, and there are a lot of whales year-round as well. The two don't mix very well, particularly right whales, which are not very good at avoiding oncoming ships. We used to be a hotspot of ship strikes of whales in the world, but no longer. So Wiley came to realize, after looking at a variety of data sets, such as where ship traffic occurs and where whales occur, and this is a 25-year database of whale sightings, partly provided by Rich's group at the center, as well as the former Whale Center of New England, Gloucester. And he looked at those data sets, and he asked himself, is this the best place for this shipping lane to be? It bisects a high-density area of whales, and maybe there's a better place for it. You can probably guess yourself where that place would be. So Mike Thompson, our expert geographic information system analyst, who is here. Mike, where are you? There you are. Got to working on the data sets and analyzing different routes that would have a conservation benefit, but would minimally impact the shipping industry. The industry has no desire to hit an endangered whale, so they told Dave that they could live with this proposed solution, which you see here. It only added 9 to 22 minutes to their time, which was minimal. The solution he and Dave came up with resulted in an 81% reduction in risk to baleen whales and a 58% reduction in risk to the endangered right whale. And seeing this powerful evidence before them that there were real conservation benefits with minimal impact to the industry, the Maritime Organization approved this lane change in 2007. And you can see here all the partners that we had to work with over 5 years to get this done. I have to add the epilogue to this story is that the North Atlantic right whale population has been declining since 2010. And just this summer, 16 animals died due to entanglement in fishing gear and ship strike. Most of those occurred in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, but 3 occurred in the vicinity of Cape Cod and appeared to be due to ship strike and entanglement. Clearly, moving shipping lanes away from high-density areas of whales is important, but there is more that needs to be done to protect this population on the brink. What makes these success stories possible is not only partnerships, but mostly the sanctuary staff who are the engine in the little engine that could. So I want to introduce you to the staff who work tirelessly to understand it, protect it, and interpret its wonders and mysteries for you. These staff are my heroes, and I call them sanctuary protectors. Here with us tonight, if you could maybe wave, is Mike, our GIS analyst, Anne-Marie Runfola, right down here. She's our volunteer coordinator and helping me as acting deputy superintendent. And then we have Peter Hong, he's over here with Mike. He's a research technician. B.B. Stokes is in our front office, and BB keeps us on the straight and narrow. Let's see, I think that's everybody, right? And Caitlin, one of our crack volunteers. And then folks that aren't here that I wanted to point out are Dave Wiley, our research coordinator, and Smersina, our education coordinator. Dave Slocum, our operations guy, Leela Hatch, our acoustician and ecologist, Alice Stratton, another ecologist. Over here is John Armour, the director of the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. And I particularly want to point out this fellow who's Kevin Powers, our ace volunteer. And he was named the Volunteer of the Year for the entire sanctuary program by the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation because of his work on seabirds. Please give these folks a hand for protecting your sanctuary. Our headquarters campus is located in Scituate in an old Coast Guard station on the harbor. And our research vessel, Auk, a 50-foot, very capable aluminum catamaran, is located there as well on the water next to the Marine Operations Center. Kevin Powers is a volunteer and citizen scientist with our Stellwagen Sanctuary Seaboard Steward Program, otherwise known as S4. Anne-Marie has turned S4 into a powerful long-term citizen science seabird monitoring program that produces data of such quality that it's being used in the National Compendium database for seabirds. Expert volunteer bird watchers from Mass Audubon use a standardized protocol for collecting data along transects 5 times a year to capture the seasonal changes in seabird populations. 15 years ago, we barely knew anything about seabirds in the sanctuary, but now we know there are at least 53 species, and our S4 program is recognized nationally as a model citizen science program. You may be wondering what that thing is on the back of this shearwater, great shearwater. Right here, and it's a solar-powered satellite tag that tracks where these shearwaters go to forage for food. And Dave Wiley and his team started this tagging program about 4 years ago, and has grown into an international collaboration investigating foraging and migratory habits of shearwaters. This slide just shows how widespread their foraging is and where they go to breed. one of these tag birds we called Everglades took off, crossed the Atlantic towards the Azores, then went south to Tristan da Cunha Islands, where they breed out in the middle of the South Atlantic, and then it headed back up the coast of South America before the tag ran out of juice. The tag's only supposed to last 2 months, but this one lasted 9 months, shedding important light on how shearwaters utilize wind patterns for their long-distance migration. We know that when shearwaters go foraging, they're looking for small bait fish, but in particular, they're looking for the sand lance that you see here. This skinny little fish literally dives into the sand to escape predation on top of Stellwagen Bank. They are not only preferred prey for many seabirds, but also humpback whales, small toothed whales like dolphins, bluefin tuna, striped bass, and several demersal fish like pollock. In other words, sand lance are the popcorn of the Stellwagen Bank Theater. Despite their ecological importance, few people in the U.S., other than avid fishermen, know just how important they are. However, the folks in Northern Europe know their importance because there's a huge commercial fishery for them in the North Sea. So it's Dave Wiley's mission to learn as much as we can about this mighty little fish and explain it to anyone who will listen, but particularly fishery managers, in hopes that we can head off any attempts to start a commercial fishery here. Dave and scientists at the U.S. Geological Survey, Boston University, Woods Hole Oceanographic, and the University of Connecticut have embarked on a long-term study of the ecology of sand lance and why Stellwagen Bank makes ideal habitat for them. It's one of the few places in the Gulf of Maine where sand lance are consistently found in large numbers. And sand lance are the reason that humpback whales are attracted to Stellwagen Bank Sanctuary, and it's humpback whales that were one of the main reasons the sanctuary was created. The most famous of these whales is Salt, the grand dame of whales. She was first seen in 1976 and named back then by the Avalar family that first saw her. And she's been seen here every year since, except one, but we think there's an unidentified photo that we think is of her. So every year, really, since 1976, she's brought 14 calves back to wean them in these waters where they learn to hunt for sand lance on their own. She's a leader among her peers, often diving and surfacing before others in a feeding group. Observations of Salt and other identified whales have led to discoveries about humpback whale society, migration, and mother-calf relationships. Since sanctuary designation, 8 salt calves, 15 grand calves, and 2 great grand calves have been observed in or near sanctuary waters. In fact, we saw Salt in the sanctuary just last month, and perhaps some of you did as well if you were lucky. A sanctuary-sponsored exhibit on humpback whales featuring Salt now resides at the Maritime Aquarium in Norwalk, and we've also made this inflatable whale model of Salt that we use as an outreach tool with schools and groups throughout New England. She's so popular that her calendar is more busy than mine, and if you want, we can bring her to your group, and you can just contact Anne Marie if you're interested in doing that. An important part of the environment for Salt and her family is the ability to communicate. Another aspect of managing the sanctuary is understanding and maintaining a healthy acoustic environment for whales, fish, and many other animals that use sound purposefully to communicate. For example, whales use lower frequency calls that are thought to play roles in finding mates, sharing food resource information, and navigating at ocean basin scales. That's the haddock right there that you just heard. Seals, dolphins, porpoises use higher frequency signals to maintain social structure, with some species able to identify individuals and echolocate prey. Many of the fish in Stellwagen Bank produce low-frequency choruses for communicating with conspecifics and attracting mates, including cod, haddock, wolffish, herring, and others. Invertebrates, such as the crab and lobsters you see at the bottom, and urchins produce mechanical sounds also with a goal of communicating with each other and with other animals. The sanctuary's animals are also highly reliant on their ability to opportunistically gather sounds from the surrounding habitat through eavesdropping. Many marine mammal animals, including those in the sanctuary, are known to hear and respond to frequencies outside of those they produce, underscoring the importance of eavesdropping. It is clear that the acoustical environment of the sanctuary is not a collection of private conversations between signalers and receivers, but an interconnected landscape of information networks. A network of listening buoys across the sanctuary, installed in 2007 for a 3-year study, measured all sorts of noises, including the distinctive social upcalls of the North Atlantic right whale. And these, the right whales appear as the small green dots that are moving around there. At the same time, the hydrophone-equipped buoys recorded ship noises, which are represented by the big splashes going, multicolored splashes going across the screen. So I'm now going to play a recording of a right whale upcall and what happens to them when a ship passes over the whales. That's the upcall. You hear the whale call again. Obviously, ship sounds overwhelm these calls. Scientists, including our own Dr. Leela Hatch, believe that in the past half-century, as we've moved to more and bigger engine-powered ships, vessels, the right whales have lost about 2/3 of their communication space at certain times of the year. That means it is harder for them to hear each other, and that they probably need to be closer or to raise their voices. The inability to hear may create problems in finding food, locating mates, caring for their young, or navigating and avoiding predators. And noise may also increase their stress levels. Well, I sincerely hope that you now know more than you did before and what it means to be a national marine sanctuary in New England. The challenges and opportunities we face, the good work we and partners do, the things that make Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary special, and the protections we've achieved so far. And so what about the future? Let me start by addressing the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is climate change. The Gulf of Maine is warming faster than most other parts of the global ocean, as Rich already mentioned. The increase has been most pronounced since 2002. This means that change is happening, and it's happening rapidly. New species are moving in from the south. Existing species are going deeper or moving to the north. Opportunistic and invasive species are gaining a foothold where once they couldn't. I can guarantee you that the composition of species found in this sanctuary in 10 years, not to mention 25 years, will be different from what we have now. Does that mean we close up shop and go away? I think not. Protecting the species and historic shipwrecks of the future is just as relevant then as it is now. In fact, I think marine protected areas such as Stellwagen Bank Sanctuary become even more relevant in a changed climate. Sanctuaries should serve as reference areas or sentinels in a changing ocean. We need minimally disturbed places in the ocean we can use as baselines against which to measure change. 2 years ago, we lost a hard-fought effort to establish the Gulf of Maine's first ever reference area, a proposed 55 square nautical mile area on the east side of the sanctuary that would have been closed to all commercial and recreational bottom fishing. I am hopeful we planted a seed by proposing this area and that someday it will take root, but it certainly would make sense that it be located in this National Marine Sanctuary. So part of my vision that I proposed at the beginning for serving as a model for sustainability includes having part of the sanctuary set aside as a true reference area that also serves as a buffer against climate-induced changes and direct human impacts. Doing so would educate us, enrich us, and perhaps increase our humility. I leave you with this lovely quote by Alan Watts. "You didn't come into this world, you came out of it like a wave out of the ocean. You're not a stranger here." I encourage you to get to know your sanctuary, embrace it, fall in love with it, and most importantly, take steps to protect it. Thank you.
So we have a little time for questions for both of you, if you'd like to both stand up. Sure. Yeah. Questions for the experts? Oh, tons of them. Okay, here. Who do you want?
It seems that we have a huge amount of information that has managed us to propose a change in how the sanctuary is used. As we continue to grow and expect to hopefully put more sanctuaries out there in America and in the world, is it lack of policy that's preventing us from making it happen, or is it lack of information to back that policy to make it happen? So do we need more data from these places understanding migration, or is it just political action?
Why don't you come closer? So you're wondering whether it's the need for more data to inform policy, or does policy need to be beefed up in order to protect?
Yeah, do we already know everything that we need to know to make the change, and it's just political agenda, or do we need more data like the ones that you just showed us to actually pursue it?
We know everything we need to know, and in my opinion, and that we just need the political will to put some teeth into this thing we call the National Marine Sanctuary. Do you want to
So we need to get that, data to the decision makers. We have to have them understand the situation that the sanctuary has learned and understands, so that will hopefully be the basis for motivating some political decisions. That's the key. They interpret the data, get it to people. By the way, you are all our decision makers as well. It's just not the politicians. Leadership can come from you putting pressure on the politicians. So we all need to understand it. We need to convey that into action at the political level.
Hi, so because there's all these people in this room and a lot of people are reporting about the marine sanctuaries, they're not as publicized as maybe national parks. I actually work for the Cape Cod National Seashore, and I'm wondering how is the best way to get people on land to really appreciate STELLWAGEN Bank. There's like cool wayside, and like there's the ocean, but you really, it's so hard to see it, and like how do you recommend sort of conveying how important it is?
She asked, how do we convey the importance of the sanctuary when it's sort of out of sight, out of mind? There's no land out there. It's seemingly just a featureless seascape of waves. So that is the enduring challenge that we have. And one of the ways I'd like to address that is by getting a professional underwater photographer to join us in the near future, like hopefully next spring, to document the wildlife, some of which you've seen here tonight, thoroughly document it, as well as the habitats, the shipwrecks, and put it on screens like this, really beautiful imagery that just captures your heart and attention, and get that, use those images at a whole variety of venues. The Museum of Science, they're interested in a sort of a documentary in the Charles Hayden Planetarium, so that you see the ecosystem happening right before your eyes, above you. Of course, here at the aquarium, MIT is interested as well. So get these images out there as much as possible. So that's one way to increase attention.
When those visuals become popular and more people see them, they'll learn things that you may know already. There are canyons in the ocean that are deeper than the Grand Canyon, a national park. There are mountain ranges that are higher than Mount Everest and our other national park areas. So the diversity and of the ocean is just as equally fantastic and exciting as are all our national park systems. But as Ben said, conveying that to people who, for the most part, see a homogeneous, flat, boring surface of the ocean is really the challenge we face.
How about back there?
Right. Good question. In 1855, Captain Henry Stellwagen was on loan from the Navy to the Coast Survey, which is the precursor to NOAA, and was tasked with surveying basically the approach to Boston. Through his soundings, found the bank. Others, fishermen primarily, knew that it existed, and they called it Middle Bank, but he officially found it, and it was named after him, Captain Stellwagen. So that's how it happened.
I think we had a question over there.
Ben, I heard that recently there were some right whales dying on the beaches, and it's been a chronic problem for years. You suggested we know what we need to know. Is there a reason for these whales dying, and do we know what to do about it?
Scott Krause here is one of the world experts in right whales, so I'm going to punt that to him.
Pretty much, whenever right whales die, it's from human activities, shipping and fishing. When we don't see much natural mortality anymore. So, simple as that. Sorry. It's bad. I know it's really exciting and depressing, but over here?
Yes, could you elaborate a little more? What more could we possibly do to protect the right whale?
Well, it's a complicated question. It has to do with altering the way we catch and eat fish, and probably slowing and altering the way we transport goods across the ocean. So there are some solutions, and it's as Ben and Rich pointed out with regard to fisheries in a sanctuary area, it's extremely complicated because there are long-standing traditional patterns of behavior on the ocean, and they will have to change. So it's tricky.
Similar to the example about learning how the shipping channel into Boston Harbor was a concentrated area for humpbacks and right whales, and then shifting the human use. We learned over the work that we've been doing at the Center for Coastal Studies that Cape Cod Bay is a prime feeding ground in the winter, January through May, for right whales. Based on that data and conveying that to the Division of Marine Fisheries, that division implemented restrictions on lobster fishing traps, lines in the ocean during the winter. They actually have a regulation now that makes all the lobstermen remove all their traps out of Cape Cod Bay, because we know and can prove scientifically that as much as 2/3 of the population will be there most recent years, and hopefully again, feeding. So that's a good example, I think, of how as we learn more and we understand the scientific behavior and convey that to responsible management agencies, we can do something. There are more things to be done. That same lesson will probably have to be learned in Canada now, since they, this past winter, moved into some new feeding grounds that they had not been going to historically, and the Canadians got surprised, and now they're going to have to figure out how to manage that fishery. And same with ships. We talked about the ships already.
Speak up.
Yeah, she was asking, in addition to changing the shipping lane into Boston, is there anything else we can do with these ships that are coming back and forth? And you're right, speed is one thing that you can change. And in fact, NOAA did require ships slow down at times of the year when the right whales are around along the entire eastern seaboard, particularly in front of heavily trafficked areas like New York City, Charleston, South Carolina, Jacksonville, is that one? And ships have to go 10 knots for a month and a half period of time when the right whales are migrating through. So scientists like Scott and others determined that there's a much higher probability of death above 10 knots, and that sort of 10 knots was the break point. And if ships stayed below that and they happen to hit a whale, the whale would probably not die. So yes, speed zones are effective and a good way to also protect whales.
I think maybe one more question.
She asked, where do you see the opportunities for getting involved in this line of work, marine resource protection and marine science? Yeah, I mean, I don't think, I hope the opportunities haven't changed because of this administration that we're in. So far, NOAA seems to be in good shape. I mean, you could become a sanctuary superintendent if you wanted by applying for the Gray's Reef National Marine Sanctuary is looking for a superintendent right now. The Hawaiian Humpback Whale Sanctuary was looking for a superintendent. That might be closed now. Someday STELLWAGEN Bank will be looking for a superintendent because I'm just acting and they're going to advertise the job that I'm in. Short of that, I mean, are you a graduate student or are you a undergrad or? All of the above, I think. I don't know if you're seeing any trends, Rich, but you know, I usually tell people the way to start is to volunteer. And here's the woman to talk to if you want to do that. Volunteers out there, look.
And I'll add to that, do not be discouraged by this election and this recent group that's in Washington. It's not going to be forever. One of the things you need to do is make sure it's short-lived, so we have to get a lot of political action going. The anti-science people who are in control now organized themselves well over the last several years and put themselves in power. We have to take that back. But it is tough to deal with this anti-science rhetoric and this fake news. So being a smart marine scientist and getting the real facts out and educating other people are critical. And I'll just share one quick short story. I was with my international colleagues in Marrakesh, Morocco, for the follow-up meeting to the Paris climate change in November 8th of last year. All right, you know that date. So I was watching, as were they, the news from the United States 6 hours ahead. So by 4 o'clock in the morning, we knew the bad news. Some people think it's bad news. And I had to go downstairs and face my international coastal colleagues who were excited a year ago because President Obama led everybody in helping the climate treaty happen in Paris. 1 year later, it's tilted the other way, and they were angry. I walked downstairs, and my colleagues were literally pointing their finger at my chest. What did you do to us, Delaney? America betrayed us. They were genuinely angry. The following day, I came downstairs, and they had turned that anger into determination to spite us, to go on, and they have been motivated. Other countries, other 195 countries, are moving forward very aggressively, even maybe more aggressively, to spite the people in Washington in their commitment to fulfill the climate Paris Treaty. So that was the good rebound right away, and that gave me a lot of encouragement, and hopefully you feel the same way.